What is youth allowance and who can get it?
Okay, well, youth allowance is a payment for a young person who is of youth allowance age, but once people turn 22, they no longer can get youth allowance unless they're studying full time, usually at a tertiary institution. After that, they'll be expected to go on to New Start allowance. The other thing that's happening with youth allowance is that there are a series of different rates that depend on whether you're living at home with your parents or whether you are living away from home because you're studying and you can't do the travel, or you're treated as independent. And the requirements of being independent are quite strict from Centrelink. From Centrelink's point of view, and those things affect how much money you get and whether your parents' income is taken into account in determining how much youth allowance you get. Okay, for youth allowance, the important thing to note is that the requirements must take into account your disability. So if you have a disability that prevents you from undertaking certain activities, then you can't be required to do those activities. Everybody that applies for youth allowance and New Start and some other payments, they have to enter into what's called an employment pathway plan. An employment pathway plan is what you agree to do in order to get your payment. So it may be some study, it may be some training, it may be some looking for work, it may be doing some courses that are relevant to help you to look for work. It will also have some requirements for you to contact a job services or an employment service provider on a regular basis to keep track of how you're going in that respect. In relation to people with disabilities in particular, if you have a temporary inability to look for work, so say you have a disability but it flares up and you can't do anything for a number of weeks, then in fact you can be exempted from having to do any activity test requirements for those weeks. You'll need a medical, a proper medical certificate that Centrelink approves, and that you'll have to get one of those every 3 months. If your disability, however, it might start off as being short term, but it looks like it's going to go on and on, because youth allowance can only be considered for somebody with a temporary disability, then you may need to look at disability support pension further down the track if it turns out that your disability has a substantial impact on your ability to look for work or to be able to undertake work, and then you'll have to apply for disability support pension. When you apply for youth allowance and they find out, or that you tell them that you have a disability, then you may be required to have what's referred to as a job capacity assessment. And a job capacity assessment is where somebody who is contracted from Centrelink will look at what your barriers to employment are due to your disability and any other barriers that are relevant as well, and they will determine what your activity test requirements will be. So they will say, for example, that you shouldn't be required to look for full-time work, but that you should be capable of looking for part-time work for a particular number of hours in a week. If, as a result of your disability, you are unable, as a result of the job capacity assessment, Centrelink decides that you're unable to work for more than 30 hours a week, different from disability support pension, either in the long term or in the short term, then they will look at you'll be considered to have a partial capacity to work, and then you will only be required to undertake work which is within your capacity. They will only expect you to undertake work where there is sufficient accommodation for your disability within the workplace and training that's available. And of course, you are never, irrespective of whether you've got a partial capacity to work or not, you're never can be expected to undertake work which will make your disability worse.
For more information, visit the Youth Disability Rights Hub at www.youthdisabilityrights.org.au.